Hi everybody, could I just do a quick sound check? Can you hear me at the back? My dulcet tones coming across the airwaves. Hi everybody, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Vicky Mcginnis and I'm Head of Cultural Partnerships and Programming at the University of Oxford. And in short, what that means is I look after research engagement in the humanities in the University of Oxford. And we are absolutely thrilled to be here at Oxford Brookes University to be able to share with you some of the work we've done, but also particularly in addition to the projects we're going to share with you today, we are also collaborating with Brookes University, and this is an absolute long-term plan and joy for us. So we're really excited that this has been able to become a real thing, and we hope to come back and share that with you another time too. The creative industries is a really important sector for us to connect to in the humanities. Storytelling is at the heart of what we do, and in supporting the researchers in the humanities to do that, true collaboration with creative industry partners and organisations has been fundamental in making that a reality. My role is only possible because of the brilliant teams that I work with, many of whom are here today, and I'll hand over to Tasha Patel, who's the Creative Industries Officer, who has also been working with the partners here on the stage, who will explain more about their projects. Just wanted to say a quick thank you, particularly to OxLEP and Brookes for inviting us to be part of this really important day, and thrilled to hear more about everyone else's projects too. If you have any queries or you have any great ideas that you think, wouldn't it be super to connect, feel free to get in touch with us via the Torch website, which is www.torch.ox.ac.uk, and you can see all our contact details on there. So I'll hand straight over to Tasha. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, thanks Vicky. As Vicky mentioned, I'm Tasha Patel. I'm the Creative Industries Officer at the University of Oxford. Our session today is going to focus on the gamification of research-led narratives, explored through one specific project led by these wonderful people here. So we have Professor Marion Turner, Lucy Askew, Rachael Hodge, and Lucy Fleming. Myself and my colleague Ruth Moore, who's over there in the Theatre and Performance Officer, have had the privilege of supporting this project, which brings together research, theatre, immersive tech to create a brilliant, sort of engaging and innovative educational experience on the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. So I will hand it over to the team to tell you a bit more about their project.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Marion Turner. So I'm a professor of English literature. I'm just going to say a little bit about this project, what we were trying to do in it. So this project, the Virtual Chaucer project, it focuses on literature that people might often initially think of as difficult, might not think is particularly accessible. So it focuses on older literature, where there are often perceived barriers for students, for teachers, for people in the public more generally. And sometimes people can't kind of access the brilliance of the storytelling, the narratives, the wit, the drama, because of anxieties about the language barrier or whether it's going to be relevant, whether it's going to be interesting to them. So I suppose what we're trying to do is to help readers to respond creatively to this literature that's often seen as very authoritative or canonical, or that many people have preconceptions about. And we're trying to model, I think, new and creative responses as part of a project to kind of hand the literature over to people to do with it what they will. So when we kind of put this project together, we really want people both to have fun with it and to learn from it. So quite a lot, we're going to be putting this this experience into classrooms with teenagers to see what they make of it, to try to introduce them to something new. So we really want it to be something that is partly educational, but also enjoyable. And of course, ever more, I think, particularly the teaching of literature these days, the way that the syllabuses are now, a lot of the fun and creativity has gone out of it, particularly the further up schools people get. And that, I think, is leading to a fall in the take-up of literary subjects. And it's really, I think, important for academics to be thinking about that and be thinking about, well, what can we do lower at younger levels down the chain than the ones that we usually teach, to try to encourage that sense of wonder in storytelling. So some people, many students will play this experience and I hope they'll just have fun with it. For others, I hope it will be a gateway drug, that they will then go and read the texts and so on in other ways, write their own creative responses, do all kinds of things with it. And we're hoping that this is a pilot that we can then expand to lots of different texts, so that eventually people could go into a portal and choose different texts that they might want to go into and experience through a website. And we wanted to use multimedia. So as you're about to hear, in this experience, it's partly about watching filmed dramatic performance, and it's partly about chatting through an AI through an AI program. So we'll talk about those things in a moment. So I just want to speak very briefly about why Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, I think, has been a great kind of key text for this kind of project. So the Canterbury Tales is a 14th century text. So it's exactly the kind of text that people often see as something that is done in a very traditional way in a classroom. What the Canterbury Tales is about is the idea that everyone should have the right to tell their own story. It shouldn't just be people of authority that get to tell stories. So the idea behind this text in the 14th century is to empower people of different genders and social classes and levels to speak for themselves, to give their own versions. And it's about creative response as well. So what we see across the text is people intervening and telling other people they don't like their stories, or they think they should have told a different story, or what they really think the story was about. And there's a lot of modeling of different kinds of responses to stories. So within the text itself, it encourages not only storytelling, but also story reading, responding in your own way from your own background and perspective to those stories. And it shows how everyone's perspective is limited. No one reading, no one telling of a story is enough. We need to have lots and lots of voices. And I suppose in this experience, what we also try to get across is that the medieval era, medieval texts are not what people think they are. So we try to get across particular things particularly about gender, about class, about idealism, about what knighthood was and chivalry was, about what opportunities women had, those kinds of things, which might surprise some people's expectations. So I think a lot of that is about trying to make these texts more accessible, and to challenge people to think afresh about the past, its difference, and its relationship to the present. I'm going to hand over to Lucy now.
Unmic my microphone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, so I'm Lucy from Creation Theatre Company, and this has been a really exciting project for us to be involved in, because it sort of became a synergy of a couple of projects that had been running in sort of almost parallel universes to this one. So we started working with Marion on Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales pre-pandemic, when we were really known for doing site-specific theatre, immersive theatre, kind of gamification of real life theatre. So we'd done productions of Midsummer Night's Dream that were based all around Frieswide Square, and you discovered their story inside shops and estate agents and breaking into coffee shops and graveyards, and great fun. And we did The Tempest on Knowsney Mead that had a similar format. So we were sort of moving into a kind of slightly more hybrid, gamified world of theatre already. And we started working on looking at Chaucer with Marion, and we did a little production of The Pardoner's Tale. And we did just a very sort of short, fast, accessible adaptation, and we took it to several different locations. We did it in the covered market, we did it in a pub garden. I think that was maybe my favourite one, actually, just seeing people coming in, having a pint, and then seeing it going on and getting sucked in. And we took it into schools and did some feedback. Then the pandemic started, and Creation had a very rapid pivot to making digital work, and completely fell in love with digital as a medium for storytelling and gamification, and just really we see it as a new art form and a new outlet, and it's not replacing our previous work, and it doesn't mean we won't do work like that in the future, but it's just we're just so excited about the possibilities. And we sort of became friends with Charisma, and partnered together on a production of Alice in Wonderland, Alice a Virtual Theme Park. So we got to know Charisma and the potential of Charisma, and working with AI creatively for interactive storytelling. And then we were invited by Torch to be involved in this project, and it was like, coming back with two friends and collaborating. And you know, for us, we've contributed to it in really providing, as you'll see, some little kind of filmed moments within the experience. And it was particularly interesting for us to look at how the audience experience and how we can work with where you're immersing yourself in a story through AI and through reading, and you know, you're getting that story through words on a screen, and what that is as an interaction and a way to draw people in, and then switching to a visual medium with our little film clips where you can add a bit more emotion and a bit more character conveyed there, and switching between those two. Our digital work has really been very focused on sort of two things, and one is liveness. So a lot of our digital shows have happened live in real time, live audiences, live performers in remote locations, mixed in together to create something that only really exists at that moment in time. And then the second one we've got really interested in is interactivity. So how you can create a kind of level of engagement that's similar to the liveness without it happening, you know, at that moment. So we did a production of A Christmas Carol this last Christmas, which was delivered in a cook at home Hawksmoor food box, and you had little boxes that you had to unwrap with artifacts in, but they led you to a website and you watched little filmed clips of the story between the courses of your food. So we're really interested in how we can use digital to get that kind of engagement and interactivity and participation. So it's very different to a film. It's very different to TV. It's not creating a complete thing that you can sit back and watch. You can't, it's a bit the same as our sort of analog shows, as I call them. But we don't want our audience to have a nap. Like, you can't come and have a rest. You can't look at your phone while you're watching a show. We're going to ask you to be involved. We're going to ask you to do things. And we have the same sort of ethos with the digital work. There's either a liveness to it, which comes with a sort of a contract really with the audience that they're going to be there and present and engaged, or there's this kind of interaction. So working on this project has been a really a key one for us in being able to sort of pull that thread a bit further and go, here we're working with like such a brilliant team to provide that narrative for us and the incredible detail that goes into Charisma and the programming of multiple narratives and audience interaction, and then to be able to deliver these little pieces of video. You'll see when we demo it in a minute, you'll probably get a bit of a sense that we've created these film clips under some still quite extraordinary circumstances, because we started working on this a year ago. So we were filming our performers for our initial Tabard Inn scene at a time when we could get them in a room together, but there were still a lot of concerns about standing near to each other. And we had one performer who had a very ill family member. So we had to film in front of a green screen. I think it's five performers are in one scene together at one point. We had to film each of them individually in front of the green screen, with the others in the room saying their lines to get the timing right. We then had to do that 5 times. We then had to get a 3D model of an inn, and we then had to take the different angles of the inn and try and get the scale and the positioning right to have it look like the 5 of them were in a space together. I mean, it just about works. There's moments when I'm watching it and I can see that an eye line isn't quite right. So I think this is sort of a very much a sort of, you know, a first stage in the project. And obviously if we were to do, you know, when we expand it, not if, when it becomes this big full experience, we'll be able to film people in one space and we won't have those issues. But again, for us, a part of what this project's been really valuable for is having the opportunity to develop some of those techniques. Actually, that challenge, that how can we make four or five people look like they're in a space together in an inn? How do we make that work? It was just like, we've learned so much through that experience. And as part of that, we took this aesthetic of saying it's matching up to Charisma. So as you'll see, we've done a sort of technical term rotoscoped or cartoonized effect on all of our film clips. So we were trying to create a world where it feels more like a graphic novel coming alive. It's a bit more, looks a bit more animated, even though it is live action. Which is, you know, an interesting sort of way to get round that feeling of it's in a green screen and maybe it's a bit flat or sort of what is it, and to try and put it in a coherent world that more seamlessly links between the bits where you're talking to a character and typing in answers and the clips where you watch a bit of film. But shall I pass on?
There we go. Can everyone hear me? Brilliant. Okay. Great. So I'm now going to talk about these kind of typing interactive sections of the virtual Canterbury Tales experience that Marion and Lucy have both kind of mentioned already. So the bits that go sort of in between the filmed sections. So I work for an Oxford-based company called Charisma, and Charisma specialise in interactive storytelling. So we develop immersive games, entertainment, and also now educational experiences, primarily for PC and mobile devices, although we've started to do a little bit of work in virtual reality, so like VR headsets as well. The first project that I ever worked on with Charisma was an experience called Will Play, which was another collaboration with the Oxford English faculty. And Will Play is a retelling of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet that uses kind of social media style, like Instagram imagery and messaging. So almost as though you're WhatsApping the characters of Shakespeare's play to progress through the story. That was also imagined as an educational resource for school students that used Charisma conversations to explore and teach a classic work of literature. So in some ways, for us, for Charisma, it was kind of a precursor to the work that we've now been involved with the Virtual Canterbury Tales project. At the heart of everything we create at Charisma is our conversation engine. So what this is basically a platform that allows writers, in this case Lucy F, to create characters and then to write the sort of script and the framework that enables players to have interactive conversations with those characters. I think it's a much easier kind of process to understand if you can visualize it rather than just me trying to explain it to you. So I'm going to share, hopefully, a few images at this point. So we're going to have a demo of the experience a little later. But just as a bit of a preview, this is what the interactive sections look like from the player's point of view. So in the white boxes, we've got the character dialogue that's been scripted by Lucy. And then in the blue boxes, those are the moments of player interaction. So the things that the player says, the points where they've been invited to interact. So this is what it looks like for the player. But then this is what it looks like behind the scenes. So this is the kind of the kind of framework that Lucy has been writing in. The entire experience is written in these kind of giant flowchart style graphs. And what the writer has to do is, I know that's a little bit difficult to see, but in the green topped boxes, that's where Lucy has scripted what the characters will say. And then the blue top boxes is where the writer has to kind of anticipate the different ways that a player might respond, so that they can be channeled down the right route and get the sort of the next appropriate piece of character dialogue, depending on how they've responded at an interaction point. So we'll just zoom in on a couple of specific moments in the conversation to explore how that kind of writing and technology are working together in a bit more detail. So here we have part of the conversation with the wife of Bath, one of the pilgrims that players can talk to, and she's asking the player to name their favorite fairy tale. So what Lucy has done is anticipated a long list, and I know it's difficult to see, but in all of these boxes, there's a kind of long list of the different fairy tales that a player might respond with, and then kind of crafted these brilliantly sassy replies from the wife of Bath, tailored to each different fairy tale that a player might name, to make sure that, so what the Charisma's conversation engine is then doing is matching whatever the player types in to one of those responses and channeling the player down that route. And we also always have a catch-all response if the player says it names a very obscure fairy tale or just says something that that we couldn't have anticipated, just to make sure the conversation keeps moving along. So this is an example where we're looking for something quite specific from the players. So somebody who says Rapunzel gets the Rapunzel response. Somebody who says Cinderella gets the Cinderella response. This is just a zoomed in example of a few of those different responses. So in this kind of situation where we're looking for really specific things, the role of the writer is quite quite intensive because Lucy is having to anticipate all the different fairy tales that might come up and write a different response for them. Very often, what we're looking for in conversation is something that's maybe a bit broader or a bit more generic from players. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in our conversation engine. So the way that the engine works is that it's always trying to find the best possible match between what the player has said and one of the options that's present in the graph at that interaction point. So to do this, it uses a branch of AI that's called natural language processing, which means that if the player types in like a synonym or a related word, something that's close to but not exactly represented in one of the blue player nodes that our writer has created, the conversation engine will still be able to match to it. So just to give another example, this is from the conversation with the knight, so another of the pilgrims. Here the knight is asking the player if they've ever heard of Alexandria. And in this example on the right, the players remembered that Alexandria has a library that got destroyed. If we look at the graph on the left, library that got destroyed is not a phrase that appears in any of the player nodes. We have library, like burning library or library that burnt down, but the specific phrase that the players used and what the players remembered isn't there. But Charisma has still been able to match to say that that's a close enough match to this kind of burning library option that the player still gets the same response from the knight, the great library, some called it, and of course it burned. So what that kind of artificial intelligence technology means for the writer is that you don't have to anticipate every single possible variant phrasing that a player might use in order to still get that sort of natural open-ended conversation happening. And it means that we don't have to resort to a sort of multiple choice option to make sure that players are getting responses that that feel suited to what they've put in. So it should save time on the writing side and hopefully make it enable that naturalistic conversation. Lucy might say a bit more about this, but a challenge with this Chaucer experience and also with Will play is that a lot of the language, if it's more archaic or a little bit rarer, our kind of database that the AI is pulling from just isn't as good at matching those types of archaic or kind of niche words. So that makes the writer's job a lot bigger in terms of having to input more different phrases and different responses. We've had a real problem with atonement and atoning in this one for some reason. But generally it does make that piece of work a lot more manageable from a writing point of view. So there are lots more features of the platform that there isn't really time to talk about today. We've got a memories feature, which means that the characters can recall what a player has said and sort of refer back to it later in the conversation. We can give characters artificial voices. They can have emotions that vary depending on how they feel about how the players responded. So as I say, too much to kind of go into today, but this has hopefully just given an initial insight into the way that the platform is combining writing and technology to create these interactive experiences that do really feel like you're having a conversation, as we'll hopefully see in the demo a bit later. Great, so I'll now hand over to Lucy.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Sounds like you can. Thank you to all of my colleagues for giving such a great lead up to what I'm going to do, which is our sort of partial playthrough. We're probably not going to get time to play through the whole thing, but I will sort of lead us through that and kind of to go on from what Rachael was saying just now. So I'm the writer on this project, and we've sort of gotten a little bit of a sense of what I do. When you hear about AI and Chaucer and kind of thinking about characters and that kind of thing, some people do think that what we do behind the scenes is to actually, I guess, train a bot to be the character. And as you've just seen, that is not really what's happening now, although there is a sort of part of the character training process that we might encounter. Just before starting this, what we're going to do is there are, as you're probably sort of trying to imagine what this actually looks like in real time. We are going to skip the first longer video, unfortunately, just because it's a bit longer, but I'm hoping that this will be a kind of taste of what playing this experience looks like. We would also really, really love, and I think Marion might mention this afterwards, if any of you are really interested in playing this when you get home or on your phone, at some point, we will hopefully be sending around a link. So we would really love any feedback that you have. And as a final disclaimer, it is still in a pilot phase. So if we get to a point where I or one of my colleagues hasn't anticipated exactly what we as an audience are going to say, you'll actually get to see in real time how the platform will respond to that, and maybe it will break, but I'm hoping that it will not. So this is our kind of landing page. I should say it is better to play on your laptop if you can. So we don't have the voices set, I don't think. You can sort of set them to read things to you. So what I'll probably do, just so everybody, I don't know how fast everyone reads, I will read everything aloud just to keep things moving. But here we are in the Tabard Inn. By a twist of fate, you found yourself in the 14th century. You're outside the Tabard Inn, where people are gathering before a journey. They're waiting for the poet Geoffrey Chaucer. Here we have little intros to each of the characters. So we've got the knight, who is a military leader returned from the Crusades, the miller, a local miller with a cutting sense of humor, the wife of Bath, a weaver and five-time widow who loves to travel, and the franklin, who is a country landowner with a taste for fine food. And in these little photos, you can see little previews of what these characters are going to look like. So you can really see how what Lucy was describing with the kind of cartoon filter might be working. Cool, so our task is just to find Harry Bailey, the proprietor of the Tabard. He's a special pilgrimage game in mind, but he'll need your help to figure out what his guests are up to. This is...
Welcome to the Tabard Inn.
So you can kind of see how it's going to work, but I am going to skip it. Just because for time, we can come back and do this later. Hopefully that's also a reason to come back and do it. But essentially what happens in that video is that Harry, who is the proprietor, sets up his pilgrimage game. So if any of you have read the Canterbury Tales, whether in the Chaucerian original or in an adaptation, you probably know that the frame story around the Canterbury Tales is that this group of pilgrims are going to Canterbury, and along the way, they're each going to tell what would be 4 tales, but what Chaucer actually wrote to be just 1 tale for some of the pilgrims. So it's a competition to see whose tale is the best. That person gets a meal at the Tabard when they return. So here we have Harry saying, just a moment, we don't even know our newcomer's name. What is your name, visitor? And I'm going to sort of open this up. We're going to do this together. So feel free to just shout out answers and I will type one of them in. So you get a sense of kind of the interactivity of it here. So what do we want our name to be? Patricia, great. You can use a variety of different names. At some point, we should also say some naughty stuff because the Chaucerian element of this does include having responses for toilet humor and that kind of thing. So you're very welcome here, Patricia. I'm Harry Bailey, a Londoner born and raised I am. I apologize for my American accent, but you know, Chaucer is also very popular in the US. What about you, Patricia? Are you from here in London? Yes was very loud. A local, I'm from Southwark myself, born and raised, greatest city in the world. So these green nodes give you a sense of like sort of extra information. So if we click here, we can see a little bit of a sort of extra tidbit about Harry Bailey. So in this case, Chaucer's character, Harry Bailey, might have been based on a real person who owned a real tabard, and in fact, he probably most likely is. And then, but tell me, Patricia, you seem not from the same London as me, almost as if you're from another time. Are you really from the 14th century? No, we're not going to lie. We're very truthful. There are different, this is a kind of thing where we can make use of that memory feature that Rachael mentioned. So Charisma will actually remember whether we are from the 14th century or not. So another of our time travelers, no shame in that. We're used to them around here. We've arrived just in time for this year's pilgrimage to Canterbury. Have we ever been on a pilgrimage? No, okay. No. We would not be alone here. After all, not everyone realizes what a pilgrimage is. So this is part of the educational side of this. Again, this is, I don't think we've actually mentioned who the target audience is. I mean, it's ideally quite broad. Anybody can do this, but it might be people who are encountering the word pilgrimage for the first time, such as, you know, somebody who's in quite early years of an elementary school or primary school situation. I won't read all of this out because I think probably all of you are following it along, but we do have a little bit of a interjection from Robin the Miller, who's one of our pilgrims, and that will happen randomly. So at this point in the actual story, the pilgrims, you might randomly get an introduction from the knight, you might randomly get an introduction from the miller, but what it means is that the experience is really, in some ways, tailored to you through the memories and sort of remembering your name and that kind of thing. But it's also going to be a little bit different for everybody who plays it. So you could play it multiple times and get slightly different responses, which is pretty fun. Okay, so do we need anything cleansed or healed or blessed? Sorry? Yes, great. Yes, my pig. I thought you might. Well, praying at the shrine of Thomas Becket might help. You must know about Thomas Becket, right, Patricia? Do we? No. No. Who is that? We're being very good to the game, by the way. We're being incredibly obedient and very, so we can be a little bit more out there if we want. Thomas Becket's quite famous, but here we have that memory. We are from another time, so we wouldn't actually know. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury, etc. He was tragically murdered right in his church. And here we have another introduction from Robin, who is, as we are sort of gathering, a bit of an annoying character, maybe. Okay, so I'll go a little bit faster from here just because I want us to get to one of the video portions. So Harry Bailey says, I'm so glad you're here. I think you may be able to help me. You heard my plan. This was in the video, hosting a tale-telling competition. And he's establishing essentially what he wants us to do in this task. So what we're being asked to do is to help scope out the pilgrims, figure out who will tell a good story. Can you do that for me, Patricia? Are we feeling nice? Sure. Brilliant. You're a lifesaver and you really deserve some kind of reward. At one point, my partner, for example, playing this said, what's in it for me? So I had to add something here about that. So here we have another green. This is just telling us about the value of money in this time. So what a penny will actually get. Somebody who's playing it now will probably not think a penny is very much money. But of course, inflation, which we're all very familiar with. I'll ask you two questions. So we're going to talk to one of the pilgrims, get asked two questions. Why the pilgrim is going to Canterbury. And second, what kind of story they want to tell. The more detail, the better. And Patricia, make sure you listen to everything they say, because we might just get asked a bonus question. I'm going to take a really, really quick pause just to say that this is something that we only came across or only sort of developed this task quite late in our process. Originally, we had started wanting to kind of tell one of the tales, in our case, the Franklin's tale, and that proved really challenging for a number of reasons. So we're still planning to do that. In fact, if you do really well, you might get to see some of what we made. But what we eventually settled on here was thinking about not just the tales themselves, so thinking about the plot or something like that, but thinking about Chaucer's world. Who are these pilgrims? What kinds of lives would they have led? How might that actually give context to the tales that they tell? Because as Marion was saying earlier, one of the really cool things about the Canterbury tales, and if someone comes away with nothing else from this experience, it's that it's all about different voices and different stories being told and making sort of different choices, which is a little misleading, of course, because Chaucer is writing them all. So that's something that we would then also encourage people, if you're doing this in a classroom, for example, to talk about that afterwards. Are these actually different voices or not? Are these historical people or not? So here we have the task, which again, which story the pilgrim is going to tell and why they're going to Canterbury. And at this point, we've got this nice reminder in the corner of what we are supposed to do. Cool. So we need to choose which pilgrim to talk to. The knight, the miller, or the wife of Bath. Any thoughts? Wife? Great. Excellent. I like nothing more than a good gossip sesh. Life for women nowadays is more fun than it looks, but it's also complicated. Are you sure you want to talk to me? So we do have a chance to sort of go back. Yes, are we sure? Yeah.
Well, hello there. Oh, I knew you'd choose to speak to me, love. I'm the most interesting person in this place. People tell me all sorts of gossip and don't think it's idle talk. Gossip is what holds society together. And I'll tell you, this storytelling competition has got me going. Oh, I can just imagine what trash the others are going to tell. No women at all. Or when there are, they'll either be boring princesses or evil shrews. No, thank you. It is a crying shame, I'll have you know. Women in England today are far more interesting than that. Why, take me. I've been married 5 times and I've got a killer fashion sense and I run my own weaving business. I won't lie, I'm at the top of my weaving game. I'm making a fortune. I made this and this. What has that pompous knight made, eh? And I've had a life of fun. This isn't my first pilgrimage either. I've been all over seeing the world and having the time of my life. I'm the only woman on this pilgrimage who isn't some kind of nun. I respect them, but Lord knows I can never be one. Love romance too much. Nothing wrong with that. I'm going to look out for my 6th husband now, so if you see anyone good. Romance. That gives me an idea. Perhaps you could help me decide which fantastic tale I'll be telling on my journey. Something far better than anything these blokes can hack up.
Cool. So I'm going to pause there. I know we're dying to keep going, but I'll pause there just so we can, I don't know if we want to do like a Q&A or sort of type of thing, but if you want to play more and see either what the wife of Bath has to say after this, you get to actually talk to her now and sort of help her decide which tale she's going to tell, hear a bit more about her life. And you might also want to play one of the other pilgrims. We were very good audience members in terms of not saying any bad words, making any fart jokes, that kind of thing. But if you do want to try that at home, I would really encourage it. Really play up that Chaucerian element, because I think that's something that Charisma, as a kind of final note, does really well, is actually gets really responsive, in part because the people at Charisma do a really great job, I think, of anticipating lots of different answers, but in other cases, it can actually lead to more knowledge, I think, about Chaucer and his sources, because Chaucer, as most of you may know, was a very naughty poet. So I'll kind of end there, but yeah, really encourage you all to play this at home if you have time.
Great, thanks so much. That was really interesting. Certainly really exciting to see it on such a big screen, and well done everyone for keeping it clean. As Lucy says, there's plenty of opportunities, and we'll make sure we're sending those links around afterwards. We do have time for some questions, so I'm wondering if anyone has any burning questions. I'm keeping in mind I also don't have my glasses on, so wave your arm. Thanks, Tasha. Oh,